At 9:55 a.m., on a warm spring morning in 1992, air traffic control at Caracas airport picked up an unidentified blip on their radar. It wasn't unusual for stray signals to appear. Old Soviet cargo planes still flew this route, but this one moved with the precision of a modern passenger jet. No squawk code, no transponder ID. When the controller tried to make contact, the response came in crisp, almost polite English. This is Pan American Airways Flight 914 from New York to Miami. Scheduled arrival, July 2nd, 1955. For a few seconds, the room went still. At first, the controller thought it was a joke, maybe a distressed pilot referencing an old movie. But when the aircraft broke through the clouds, it was nothing like the Boeing 747s and sleek Airbuses they were used to seeing. This was an immaculate Douglas DC-4, the exact same four-engine prop. Liner Pan Am retired decades ago, and inside were passengers who swore they had left New York that morning. The only problem? That morning was 37 years ago. In 1955, air travel was still a symbol of modern luxury. Flying wasn't routine, it was an event. Pan American Airways, Pan Am, was America's flag carrier to the world, a name synonymous with safety and elegance. Flight 914 was scheduled as a routine hop, New York to Miami, 1,100 miles, just under 4 hours. On board were 57 passengers, businessmen in summer suits, families heading to Florida vacations, and a flight crew led by Captain Victor Grayson, a decorated former U.S. Army Air Forces pilot who had flown supply missions over Europe during the war. The morning of July 2nd began clear, Idlewild Airport, now JFK, saw Flight 914 taxi onto the runway at 9:55 a.m., its silver and blue DC-4 gleaming in the sun. There was nothing unusual in the flight plan, nothing unusual in the weather. The aircraft lifted into the sky and banked south. About an hour later, air traffic control in Miami received a position report from Flight 914. Estimated arrival, 1:15 p.m. As was standard, they waited for the next check-in. It never came. At first, the assumption was technical failure. Radios cut out all the time. But when the plane failed to appear on radar, the concern deepened. Search efforts began immediately. The Civil Aeronautics Board coordinated with the Coast Guard, sending out aircraft to sweep the ocean and the Everglades. For days, there was no trace, no oil slick, no debris, no emergency calls. The DC-4 had simply vanished. Investigators speculated on three possibilities: catastrophic mechanical failure over open water, with wreckage sinking before being spotted, disorientation and fuel exhaustion, possibly leading to a crash deep in the swamp, a hijacking, although in 1955, such crimes were rare and often politically motivated. Families of the passengers clung to hope. With no wreckage, the word missing remained on every report. But as weeks turned to months, hope drained away. By 1956, Pan Am officially declared Flight 914 lost with all souls aboard. For decades, the case became just another entry in aviation's unsolved ledger. Then came May 21st, 1992. Caracas Air Traffic Control's radar sweep caught the incoming target at about 200 miles northeast, cruising at 10,000 feet, an unusually low altitude for arrival. Controllers assumed it was an older prop aircraft, possibly a charter. They initiated contact. Unidentified aircraft, this is Caracas Control. State your call sign and intentions. The reply came back, clipped and professional. This is Pan American Airways Flight 914, en route from New York to Miami. We have 57 souls on board. The controller, startled, repeated the question, adding the date. After a pause, the pilot responded, "Today is July 2nd, 1955. At first, the tower suspected a misunderstanding or even a prank transmission. But when the plane came into visual range, every doubt began to evaporate. The Douglas DC-4 looked brand new. Polished metal, the classic Pan Am globe on the tail, the company's pre-1960s font on the fuselage, the propeller spun evenly, engine smooth, no signs of distress. It lined up for approach, but instead of following the vector into Caracas, the pilot began circling, as though unsure where he had landed. On final contact before touchdown, the captain's voice shifted, tinged with confusion, maybe fear. This isn't Miami. When the aircraft finally touched down on Caracas' secondary runway, Ground crews scrambled to meet it. As the DC-4 taxied, the pilots kept the cockpit shades half drawn. The windows of the passenger cabin were open and heads peeked out. The passengers were dressed like they de-stepped out of a 1950s photograph, men in fedoras, women in knee-length summer dresses, children clutching tin lunchboxes. Airport security surrounded the aircraft, unsure if this was a Cold War-era defection or a smuggling operation. When the mobile staircase rolled into place, Captain Grayson appeared in the doorway. His expression was a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. The conversation between Grayson and the ground operations chief was later reconstructed from multiple witness statements. "This is Caracas? Yes. Captain. Venezuela. You're safe. This is impossible. We left New York this morning. We should be over Miami by now." Inside the terminal, immigration officers tried to process the passengers. They carried paper tickets stamped July 2, 1955. Their wallets held crisp U.S. bills from the same year. A copy of the New York Times, dated that morning, lay in the carry-on bag of a businessman named Harold Thompson. Even more unsettling, their watches still read just past noon. As airport medics examined them, they found no signs of malnutrition, dehydration, or the weathering one would expect from being lost for decades. Back in New York, the FBI was notified. Within hours, agents boarded a military transport to Caracas. Venezuelan authorities requested Pan Am records and confirmed that every single name on the manifest matched those declared dead in 1956. The DC-4 itself presented another puzzle. Its airframe hours, according to maintenance logs on board, were exactly in line with a plane that had been airborne for only the intended 4-hour journey. There was no sign of corrosion, no evidence of retrofitting or tampering. Even the fuel gauges matched the estimated burn from New York to Miami. But then came the most disturbing detail. Air traffic recordings showed that, shortly after being told the current year, Captain Grayson seemed increasingly agitated. He asked repeatedly, "What's happened to the United States? And where's President Eisenhower?" According to witnesses, when immigration officials began asking too many questions, Grayson abruptly turned back toward the aircraft, shouting for his crew to prepare for departure. He waved off ground staff. Before anyone could stop them, the DC-4's propellers roared to life. The aircraft taxied to the runway without clearance. Tower instructions were ignored. The control tapes captured the last transmission, "We're going home now." The DC-4 accelerated and lifted into the Venezuelan sky, banking northeast. No radar picked it up after it left the airport's perimeter. In the days that followed, the incident became a diplomatic knot between the United States and Venezuela. Officially, both governments denied the event ever took place. But among airport staff, the story spread like wildfire. Too many had seen the old Pan Am plane with their own eyes. Journalists dug into archives. The names of the passengers matched those on the Civil Aeronautics Board's 1956 presumed dead list. Families, now decades older, were quietly approached for comment. Some refused to speak. Others claimed they had received mysterious phone calls. In the nights following the Caracas landing, voices that sounded exactly like their lost relatives, saying only, "We're all right." Before the line went dead, a maintenance worker at Caracas Airport, interviewed anonymously years later, described slipping onto the tarmac during the chaos. He claimed he saw through the cabin windows, passengers sitting calmly, staring forward, as though waiting for permission to disembark, or for a signal to depart. None appeared panicked. Theories multiplied. Some suggested a navigational error combined with freak atmospheric conditions. Perhaps the plane had been forced far off course and landed elsewhere, its passengers hidden away for reasons unknown. But the logistical impossibility of feeding, housing, and preserving 57 people for 37 years without aging shattered that theory. Others whispered about temporal anomalies, wormholes, magnetic fields, distortions in time. Aviation experts scoffed. Pilots dismissed it as science fiction. Yet one fact remained. The DC-4 was gone. The only tangible artifact came from an air traffic controller who, days after the incident, found a small leather-bound flight log in his office mailbox. Inside were entries consistent with the route from New York to Miami, the last dated July 2nd, 1955. Reading simply, visibility good, all normal. The handwriting matched Captain Victor Grayson's from personnel files. In 1993, the FBI quietly closed its incidental aviation report on the matter, citing insufficient evidence. No wreckage was found. No confirmed sightings of the DC-4 appeared in the years after. Pan Am had ceased operations by then. and the case faded into urban legend territory. But among aviation historians, the Flight 914 incident remains a point of quiet fascination. It's not the impossibility of an aircraft disappearing. History has no shortage of vanished flights. It's the precision of the reappearance, the lack of deterioration, the unchanged fuel load, the passengers whose clothing still smelled faintly of the 1950s cabin air. And then, there's the human cost. Families who had grieved for decades suddenly found themselves reopening old wounds. Some believed the story was a cruel hoax. Others chose to believe their loved ones had made it home, somewhere. In the years since, at least 3 separate aviation radio operators, one in Newfoundland, one in the Azores, and one in northern Florida, have reported hearing faint, untraceable transmissions. This is Pan American Airways Flight 914 for request position check, en route to Miami. No such flight exists, and if the voice truly belongs to Captain Victor Grayson, it means Flight 914 is still out there. Somewhere between the pages of history and the horizon we can quite reach. A jet, or rather, a prop liner, forever in transit. A jet, or rather, a prop liner, forever in transit. One Caracas ground crew member, now in his 80s, broke his silence in a taped interview last year. He swore that as the DC taxied for its unauthorized takeoff, he locked eyes with a little girl in the last row by the window. She had been clutching a red toy airplane, chipped paint on the wings, one wheel missing. As the plane accelerated, she lifted the toy, pressed it against the glass, and mouthed something he couldn't hear. It was only after the aircraft vanished into the haze that he realized she hadn't been looking at him at all. She'd been looking past him, as if she could see someone waiting just behind his shoulder. And in the silence that followed, he swears he heard, faint and distant, the slow, even hum of propellers, circling somewhere above.